Perfect. So I'm going to hand this over to Rebecca and Meg, and thank you all so very much for joining us. If you have questions, you can either drop them into the chat function or you can ask them kind of at, whenever seems appropriate. So with that, I'm handing it over, and thank you, Rebecca and Meg.
Thanks, Diane. So I'm just going to kick us off with a few opening remarks. First of all, thank you everybody for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. Rebecca actually reached out to me about, Rebecca, it's maybe 6 to 8 months ago, springtime of this year, earlier this year, because I'd written a little thought leadership piece around the importance of a personal board. And she had also been doing a lot of work and written some material about the same concept. And so the two of us got together and started thinking about why something like this matters. And Rebecca's gonna, but we thought it would be a good idea to share some of the findings that we've done so far and get some feedback from the Quorum community about your experiences with creating your own board, and if you haven't done that, why haven't you, or what's held you back? So we're interested in all of those kind of that feedback and those kinds of stories. So we'll involve you throughout the whole process of the presentation today. I wanted to tell you that I met Rebecca probably, Rebecca, I think it's 8 or 9 years ago now, if you can believe it.
Yeah, it's a long time ago, isn't it?
It's been a while. And we both had worked in professional services arena. We had a lot of mutual contacts and friends. And so I went to see her when she was still at Ernst & Young, doing some terrific work for them, trying to raise awareness about the challenges for women and the problems around the need for greater diversity and inclusion and everything that we did. And I remember the first thing that she shared with me was a report that E&Y was putting out that you were running, I think, Rebecca, at the time, about what it was going to take to achieve parity globally for women. And the horrors of the report was that it was going to be at least 2 generations beyond my lifetime, was how long it was going to take for us to get parity for women. And so I remember the two of us having a conversation about that, and how we both sort of pledged that just wasn't satisfactory. We had to do something about that and, find ways in the way that we work and the things that we do to help solve for that, change that dynamic, change that number. So anyway, I think it was like 95 years or 100 years, Rebecca, at the time.
Yeah,
and
I don't even want to tell you what the number is.
I think it's gotten worse.
Meg.
I think it's gotten worse. Because as it goes. So anyway, I just wanted you to know we are kindred spirits on many levels. And so I was very excited to do this work with Rebecca, and we're hoping you all will enjoy it as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Rebecca, to kind of kick us off.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Meg. And it's really lovely to be here today. And I'm actually gone back to gallery view because I want to see everyone on my screen. I'm based out of London. We've had the most horrific storms in the last 24 hours. So just a small caveat, if for any reason my line goes down, I am plugged into the router. Meg's going to catch the ball and keep the show on the road, as they say, and then I will join you as quickly as I can. And it's also particularly lovely to see a couple of my UK friends and colleagues here as well. So it's lovely to see you, Anne and Michelle and Sarah as well, and then Philippa, who's over in Stockholm. So it's lovely to see you, as well as all of you fabulous Quorum ladies in the US. So I'm just going to jump straight in. I'm going to share my screen because Meg has set the scene around why we're here today, what we're going to be talking about. It's the board you cannot afford. Why the board you cannot afford? I have a wonderful woman called Joanne Hessian to thank for the name. She is an Irish activist in the gender space, in the leadership space. And we were talking several years back about this idea of really what women need when they are in mid-career and beyond to get to the next level, however they choose to define or describe that for themselves, is this idea of a board you cannot afford, this boardroom that is aspirational. The idea is if you had to pay the people in your personal boardroom, you wouldn't be able to pay them because it's so aspirational, because they wouldn't be there and available to be paid. So the idea is that it's a really aspirational group of individuals who are there to support you as a woman to get to wherever you want to get to. And what we find, or what we found historically, is that men have this. They don't have the language necessarily for it, but they have much more ready access to these kind of connections, this networks of loose ties. We're going to talk a bit more about that, and a new phrase that I learned this week called dormant ties, and I'll talk a bit about that later on. But loose ties and dormant ties, where they can tap in and build a board you cannot afford far more readily. And it may be conscious or unconscious that they're doing that, but it certainly is something that helps them and helps their careers, that's for sure. And so what Meg and I have tried to do, and what we really want to explore with you today, is kind of encapsulate our thinking in a couple of key slides, the key concepts that we've got in a couple of key slides. And what we then want to do is we want to test this with you really rigorously. We want to then capture your thoughts, your input. We want to do that in Europe as well, and potentially in other couple of parts of the world, including the Middle East and Asia. And we want to write up a white paper. It's ambitious, but we think it really is needed. Yeah, because often in my coaching work, I work with women in mid-career quite a lot, and this is the thing that they don't understand. This is a concept that they don't have access to, and it's actually the key lever, as Meg called it, in really helping them to accelerate their careers and often get that very first elusive C-suite role. But it doesn't just have to be in that context. It could be for board work, it could be a number of different contexts that you can build this board you cannot afford in. So I'm just going to jump to the next slide. I hope that makes sense. Do feel free, as Diane said, to just put things in the chat and share, or put your hands up and share with us any questions that you've got. Because I'm sharing my screen though, I can't currently see the chat, so I'm reliant, Meg, on you and Diane to pick that up. Yeah,
I'm going to ask Diane if you don't mind doing it, because I can't see it either. So if there's questions or things, please feel free to sort of interrupt. So the work that Rebecca alluded to that we've been doing over the last several months was really to think about the critical roles that one needs to have on their board that would really help them in terms of accelerating their career forward and supporting in next steps and movements that you're interested in and focused on. Almost as Rebecca said, at any stage that you find yourself in your career path. So, think about it from that angle. So we came up with 5 key roles that we thought were important. The sounding board, the advocator, the inspirer, the supporter, and the door opener. And I'll talk about those in a minute in depth. But the couple key things is that sometimes an individual can play multiple roles at any time on your board. So you can think about it in that way. We recommend that when you're thinking about building your board, that you're quite intentional about ensuring that there's somebody on your board that fills the role, each one of these roles. So there's a balance in the board that you create. And sometimes you may end up with more than one person in one of these roles, but we want you to be careful about overloading your board with folks, because if you're serious and intentional about the roles these folks play for you. It's important that you don't bite off more than you can chew in terms of how many people you're interacting with and managing and getting advice from. So those are just some overall thoughts. I want to just dive down and talk to you about a couple of the roles, or talk about the roles more in depth. So Rebecca, if you could go to the next slide. So the 5 roles, as we're calling it, one is the advocator. And I think you all know what this looks like, but we wanted to define it for you. It's this notion of someone who is able to advocate for you. So they're in a strong professional position. Sometimes that can be in the same industry that you might be in. Sometimes it's just that they're in a very senior position elsewhere and therefore have lots of pull and clout. This is the person that acts as a sponsor and champion for you in the broadest sense of that terms, in the broadest sense of that term. We are defining here as the sounding board. And this is somebody who's really got, who really acts as a constructive listener and challenger. You know, they're someone that's going to feed back what you've just said to them, you know, back at you. They often have a lot of experience in the space that you're playing in. So your same industry or a similar type of business situation. And they can really help you think through the noise that you have in your head, you currently have in your head. So they're very important. That's a very important role. Then the third role that we've defined here is a door opener. And that's someone who really has a broad network, broad base of contacts. And it's somebody that's very willing to open up their contact base and make it available to you. This is critical, we think, because as you're considering next steps, thinking about the next career move, trying to decide where you might want to take your career over the long term, they're going to open the door for you to talk to lots of people that can help you think that through. So that also is a critical role on your board. The fourth role that we've defined here is the inspirer. And this is someone who actually is going to push you way out of your comfort zone. And we think this is important because they're going to challenge you in ways you've never been challenged. This is somebody who thinks differently all the time. So it ensures that you get out of feedback that's an echo chamber, you know, that kind of responds right back to something you've heard already. You really want someone that's going to challenge you in a whole new way, who thinks about the world, the business environment, society in general, very differently from you, and will really push you to consider other avenues, other ways, other ideas. So that's the role of the inspirer. And the fifth role is the supporter, because as we all know, being out there in the working world and particularly thinking about how you take next steps and what kind of next steps you take and what do they look like, we all need a support system. But this supporter on the board is really critical because they're an active listener, so someone who's very open-minded, listening to what you say. They're someone that can be very compassionate and empathetic about the things that are going on for you or you're experiencing. And they are really a cheerleader to someone that's giving you confidence in your journey and not give up, not give in, you know, things like that. So that's the role of the supporter on the board. So Rebecca, I don't know if we want to give a stop for a second and see, ask a few and
Yeah,
see what they think about these roles and.
Mm. Yes, I think so. I mean, what we really would like from you is sort of some feedback about how and testing, if you like, of Meg and my thinking about what these roles are. We have developed a template as well that we're going to share afterwards that sort of will help you fill in, if you like, past, present, future for your board you cannot afford. I think the other thing that I would add as well is that some of these roles are going to be for a season, some are going to be for a reason, some are going to be for a lifetime, if you know that phrase. Yeah. And the idea is that, you know, you might have several people in one category. So I could think particularly when it comes to things like the inspirers, you might have a few different people who are there really inspiring you and challenging you and getting you to sort of move outside your comfort zone. And similarly with advocators, you know, so there could be multiple people and they may be there for a very specific reason. So I think I talked earlier on about maybe you want to get a first board role or whatever. So you might only be working with that person on your board for a very short period of time. Yeah. But this idea that there is fluidity and movement within your personal boardroom as well. And that idea of season, reason, lifetime. And things like supporters, often they are the lifetime ones. Yeah, they're the ones who end up being there for the whole journey, if you like. And I can see there's a hand up there from Zoe. So Zoe, do you want to just jump straight in?
Hello, thank you. So I have a sort of informal board of my own that I set up when I was thinking about leaving corporate safety and setting up my own business. I have a role on that board who I love to death, who I politely call my arse kicker. And you can probably come up with a much politer way of referring to her, but her specific role is she's very, very pushy in her personal style. She's much more confident than I am. And I know that when I need a push, she's the person that I call to say, oh my God, I can't believe you're overthinking this. Why haven't you done this already? Of course you can do that. And she's a confidence giver, but she definitely does not check the empathetic, supportive listener box that you've sort of characterized. You're inspiring. She's also not somebody who thinks about the world in a different way than me. I think she's just somebody who has personal qualities that I struggle with. And that's the role that she fulfills for me. I have a hard time with the confidence piece. And when I need somebody to give me a, oh my God, of course you can do this pep talk, she's the person I call for that.
That makes complete sense.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So this idea that it doesn't necessarily need to be somebody with highly empathetic qualities. It can be, but it can definitely be sort of somebody who is the confidence giver, the nerve giver, whatever you want to call it, that really sort of gives you that kick in the pants, as you said.
Exactly.
When you're feeling the wobble or you're procrastinating, or not that any of us ever do that. But yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks. Thanks, Zoe. And I can see Anne had her hand up and Sarah as well. Anne, do you want to jump in quickly and then Sarah?
Okay, I think this is absolutely terrific. I'm going to take this along to a session I'm doing for 3 young female executives tomorrow.
Right.
I've been asked by a PR agency to give them some informal, they've called it training. Yeah. They don't have many senior people in the organization. And I've been a mentor to the founder of this agency through the years. So I think it's absolutely terrific. And what I like about it is that a lot of this could come under the general heading of mentoring, which I do, right, voluntarily unpaid, and coaching, which I've never done because I'm not qualified. It's, you know, that's a job that needs qualifications. But what this does is make it both very informal, but it also analyzes what you want. So it's very clear that it's up to the individual to analyze what they want, select the people, be very specific about what they want. And I think the really key things is it could be for 2 months, or it could be for a year, or it could be forever. And it's very specific. I think it really pulls the whole thing into a much broader but more accessible way of going about this. And I can imagine really having valued this when I was younger. I'm going to suggest it to my charges tomorrow.
That's great.
Thanks, Anne. And I think you touch on a very important point there, that this is, I think it's relevant to everyone, young women, you know, mid-career women. I use it also with some of my male coaching clients as well. I think what we're saying here is, though, it's the intention, it's the intentionality of it and the discipline of doing it that's really important. And often I think what happens with women is, particularly in that sort of mid-career phase, their time gets very squashed, really, really squashed. And so even if they know intentionally they need to do this, it drops to the bottom of the list. Yeah. So part of the model that we're going to walk through in a minute is saying, well, how do you make sure it's a bit like brushing your teeth? You do 2, 5, whatever minutes a day, a week, whatever you can to keep it going. Because I think that's the other thing. It's the intentionality, understanding it, then doing the intentionality of it. And then how do you not deprioritize it as well? That's really, really important. Yeah. Oh, Anne, are you saying something? I can see you're mute, and I'm wondering if you wanted
I'm
to
just nodding.
Yeah, okay. Sarah, I can see you've got your hand up, so do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. I agree with Anne. I think it's an incredibly useful lens to look through and to help people recognise how they need to work with and through others, even on their own personal career quest. I think we sometimes think we've got to do it for ourselves, and that's not the way it is. When you were talking through the models, I was sitting here sketching, like, okay, who have I got where then in each of these boxes? And the role for me, and I think it's partly what Zoe was saying, but for me, that someone that I have on my personal board is, I'm reluctant to call them the accountant, but I can't think of a better word. They're more my Jiminy Cricket, my conscience. They're the person who holds me to account and reminds me of the commitments I've made to myself. I'm really good at kind of drifting towards something that's really shiny and distracting myself. And they actually say, hang on a minute, Sarah, I thought you said that you were going to have done this, this, and this for yourself by this point. How are we getting on with that? So for me, the role that's missing is the person who holds me to account, even if I'm not good at doing it myself, especially if it's something they know I'm reluctant to do.
Yeah. That's really, I've actually written that earlier on. I was thinking, yeah, when Zoe said as well about there's a conscience element to it, isn't there, as well?
It's your Jiminy Cricket, isn't it? It's your Jiminy Cricket who'll leap up and down and say, oi, actually.
Yeah. I love that.
Person.
Cricket, I love it. Yeah, that's great. No, that's important. Yeah, for sure. I think Gitanjali, do you have your hand up too?
I do. I'm just thinking in the roles that you've outlined, and I know I think Anne might have mentioned this in terms of being a mentor and then versus being a coach, and then how the personal board of directors differs from those roles, right? Because again, if you're talking about sort of the personal board of directors that kind of follows you throughout the, every level of your career, coaches and mentors are kind of, periodic. They serve a specific purpose, right? But how does that personal board provide you with that broader perspective, right? To guide you through sort of key decisions, your career milestones, and yeah, how that
I think
changes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, because I think they are invaluable, in particular key transition points, the board you cannot afford. So Zoe's example of when you leave corporate for that's when a board you cannot afford could, or, you know, so it's that sort of, and it's more than just a mentor, you know, it's a sort of, it is that real sort of much broader set of perspectives. And I see we've also, so thank you for that. We've also got a couple of comments here in the chat from, there's one from Michelle, just saying, building on Zoe's point, recognizing the skills differences to your own style. So making sure like you're not in that echo chamber, but having that some people with different styles. It's challenger inspiring who does think differently to you or those you're coaching. Yeah. Yes, so we need to build. This is all great feedback, by the way.
Yeah,
thank you so
amazing.
much.
Yep.
Yeah, we can build that in. Is there anything sort of just else that comes to mind? I guess one of the questions that Meg and I have is, you know, we often say, you know, culturally, people often think that the UK and the US are very similar, but actually there are real differences there as well. And so I'm thinking from a cultural perspective, in it, how does this resonate, in particularly, you know, with those of you who are based in the US? Is there anything that culturally you think needs to be added that would be helpful? Yeah. That, I think that was one important question we had, wasn't it, Meg, as well?
Yeah, for sure.
I think my screen is frozen.
Yep. It looks like Zoe raised her hand to answer that question.
Yep.
Hello again. Right, so I'm a Brit living in the US, so this is a question that speaks close to my heart. I've been here for almost 20 years. I'm wondering if you're planning to cover this anyway, which is the topic of asking for help.
Yeah.
So if you're going to speak to that anyway, maybe I'll let you speak to how you go about doing the asking.
Yeah.
But I think there are very definitely cultural differences between US and UK women around how we ask for help.
In how in the ask itself. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
But I also think one of the struggles that I've had as a British woman in the US is that when I've asked people for help, particularly women who are more senior than me and are therefore older in years, and potentially also boomer generation. I'm a Gen Xer in US vernacular, 70s love child in British vernacular. But there's very definitely differences in terms of how older women were socialized to behave. I've lost track of whether this is true in the UK as much as it is in the US, because I've been here for so long. But I notice that the advice that I get from older US women is very cautious, more along the lines of don't risk it, don't raise your head above the parapet, don't be different, you need to fit in, you must assimilate. I think those messages that those women, the few of them who made it, quote unquote, in the US, are much more socialized to fit in rather than to stand out. And I sometimes have a hard time knowing what to do with that advice, because I don't think that that's how my generation think about it as much. And it doesn't resonate with me as much as a Brit hearing that sort of American caution. I'm interested to know what other people's reaction is to that. Genuine Americans as opposed to an assimilated one.
Genuine Americans. We have Marta and Julie who both have raised their hand. Marta, do you want to make a comment and then we can circle back on Zoe's comments?
Just very quickly, another displaced Brit, also been here for about 20 years. So I have a couple of comments really, that I find that the culture corporately or entrepreneurially in America requires a lot of positive energy. And so what I would say is whoever does that cheerleader role should really be considered to be important. If you don't feel that that is part of your natural personality, you are supposed to walk into a room in this country, at whatever level, board level or any other, and exude a great deal of self-confidence. You do not, you leave your imposter syndrome at home in the morning, and that's hard for most of us. But I think in this country, it's an actual requirement for any kind of success. Secondly, I would say that in America, entrepreneurialism is important, whether it's about business building within a corporation.
Right.
I reacted a little bit when I heard you say things like getting on the corporate ladder, you know, the next career opportunity. Those are all good and useful, but I do think that here there's an expectation that you're building businesses even within a business. And also
Correct.
a lot of people looking at their next move, I think more so in America than in Europe, will consider starting their own business as the next kind of step option, rather than, you know, which company do I go to next. So, you know, sorry, I've been a bit long-winded, but my comments just to finish up is that kind of weaving that a little bit more into how you're positioning this and giving that as a lens to look through would be a big advantage. But I'm very excited about what you're doing, and I'm happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
No, I was going to say thank you, Marta. That's really helpful. So that's more the anchoring, the positioning piece, and taking on board the cheerleading piece in the US is, you know, that is naturally supposed to be there, that positivity. Whereas, yes, you're right, in Europe, that is absolutely not a given at all.
Right.
at all. Both, well, Meg and I've both worked in France, so you know, we know that is definitely not a given. Some really great comments in the chat as well. I see, Julie, that you've got a comment as well. I just want to say, so yes, a mix of gender, age and race. For me personally, I want someone who resonates with my upbringing. That's really interesting. I think there's an element there of, yes, you do, but you also want the challenge, the not the echo chamber piece as well. So we need to think about how we weave that in. And then Anna's put a comment in about sounding board being quite an accessible descriptor that cover many. Okay. And then I see that Michelle has had to leave, but she's put in a comment there as well. So Julie.
Well, I wanted to just kind of follow up with what you said, Rebecca. I think that's what you said about the generational differences and asking for help. And this was so clear to me at the HOW Forum in November, because I was in a session at a table with women who were significantly younger than me. And we were doing an exercise where it was led by Dana Galen, and we had to kind of plan out our next year, what we wanted to do. And I did the exercise, and then the two women who I was speaking with, Paula De Laurentiis and Amy Ho, said, no, you're doing it. This is really where you need to be. And I have to admit, I had a pang of anxiety because women in my generation are not used to asking for help. And in fact, unfortunately, when I was coming up in the corporate world, I had a lot of lousy female and male managers who were always putting me down and always telling me that I didn't do things right or I wasn't whatever. And so it was like a trigger for those feelings. And I pushed through it. And I'm so grateful for those two women for giving me that very valuable feedback. And I have been thinking about it ever since the HOW Forum. How am I going to take action on what they said to me? And I've thought about, pulling together officially a personal board of directors. And I'm also very intimidated about that. What if they say no? What if they, whatever. Right. And so I haven't done that yet, but this conversation is pushing me forward.
That's great.
Thanks, Julie. And I think it was Zoe who made that point, and we need to put that in there, that the generational goes with the cultural and the contextual piece. It's really important, actually, because in the way you prepare individuals to make the ask, I think there's a sensitivity piece there around particularly, boomer, early Gen X's, myself included, we weren't taught to ask, in the same way that the Gen Yers and those coming through have been taught to ask. So I think that's a really important part of it. So thank you for that. Where do we want to go from here, Meg? I'm just sort of doing a quick time check.
Yeah, I think we're good. I would recommend that we maybe walk everyone through a little bit of the work we've done on the how part,
Okay. Shall I jump to the next slide then?
Do you want to exactly?
Yeah. So so the how, I think, is the piece, and I know I think it was Zoe as well, so didn't want to sort of jump in too early on that one. But the how is important. This is what Meg and I have come up with from our perspective, but we really do want you again to challenge us robustly. That for us, really, it all starts with that template that I talked about, looking at who's been passed, who have you got at the moment, where the gaps are. Is it aspirational enough? All of those lenses. Is it diverse enough? Is it all of those things for what you want to achieve? And it may even be that you slightly tweak. If you've got a couple of things that you want to achieve, maybe the board is skewed for one thing slightly differently than for the other. But it's really important to do the assess step first. And then I think the next one is the identify. And the identify is not that easy often for women, because we often, as I say, don't prioritize the networking piece. We are, there are a lot of pressures on our time, particularly as we head into mid-career and beyond. And those, can be caring at all sorts of different pressures, health, etc. And so understanding that it's okay if you don't have a top rate network. That is the work that you're going to be doing, and it might take a long time, might make several years to get to the place where you want to get, but that's okay. The important thing is to start identifying who you need. And then the other thing, and I wonder again if this is a generational piece. Bless you, by the way, Marta. I wonder if it's a generational piece, is this idea of loose ties. So people who have known a long time. So like Meg and I could at one point probably have been described as a loose tie this time last year. We'd known each other, we'd done stuff, but then Meg had moved back to US and I'd been busy leaving corporate life and doing my thing. But then I saw a post and I thought, this is really interesting. And I sent her a note. That's a loose tie. We probably hadn't spoken for the best part of 5-6 years, maybe, I think.
Right.
And but I took the step and sent the note. And I think this is where women often also think, I can't do that because I haven't spoken to them recently, or I haven't been in contact recently, or they'll think I'm just after something, or whatever it is. This is the bit that I think, by the way, men do a lot better. I have many men email me, "Hi, Rebecca." Literally, I had one who hadn't spoken to me for over 20 years. He emailed me about a year ago, and now we're back in contact and we're doing stuff, but we hadn't spoken for 20 years. And that I will call a dormant tie. That's not even a loose tie, that is a dormant tie. But I think it's really interesting that we often put filters on our behavior and we restrict ourselves from actually just stepping into the space and saying, hey, and I think it was Marta who said, or no, it was Julie who said, and what if they don't want to help me, or what if the answer's a no, or I can't quite remember. That's okay. That's absolutely okay. The stronger your ask, though, and we'll talk about that a little bit, is the stronger your ask is, the more compelling it is usually for the person, and then the more likely they are to say yes, though. And that goes to point 4, is really developing that ask. And it sounds to me like, Meg, you and I need to do some work around the ask bit.
The ask, for sure.
What the steps are in developing an ask, what the generational, what the cultural nuances might be. And Zoe, I don't know if this is a point at which you want to jump in and just add your thoughts on the ask piece that you've observed.
I think that people, your audience, will find it very, very helpful to have you sort of script an example. This is how, sorry, you can hear my puppy barking in the background. Sorry for that. That you can script out, this is what an ask would sound like. And this is what the sort of the range of responses is that you might get. And here's how you'll react to them.
Yeah.
I think that those are the mental steps that we take, whether we acknowledge them or not, in limiting ourselves about why we don't make the ask in the first place. And sometimes all it takes is for somebody to give you the words for you to be able to imagine yourself saying them.
Yeah. I don't disagree. I also think there's this whole notion, because we're not socialized that way to ask, and the ask feels transactional to us often. So that's the part that trips up women. They're afraid to, because they don't want to appear to be burdening somebody else with. But I do believe, or the things that I've seen, and the beauty of the board members I've had on my board is the ask, the hardest part of the ask is what's going on in your own head. It's not actually the words that come out of your mouth towards the person you're hoping to ask. So the first step is getting is the noise that's going on that's holding you back from feeling like the ask might actually be something that person really wants to do, rather than what if they reject me. We're always on the back foot with a negative before we get to the positive. And my experience has been, in most of the asking I've ever done, is people are really interested actually in trying to help. You more often get a positive than a negative, and the negative, the only reason you get a negative usually is because they're juggling too many things. They can't dedicate the time or energy or something, and they feel like they wouldn't be able to help you the way you need help. So that, at least that's been my experience in terms of finding it. So the hardest part of the ask is what's going on in your own head, and the voices in your own head. And it's less even about the words that actually go out. But Zoe, I really appreciate, even if we help give some language, that may just help people get over that step,
I love that, actually, because that could go hand in hand with the template. You could literally have, so what can an ask look like? What might be the stories you tell yourself, and how to anticipate reactions. And I think, and then, those kind of key steps, breaking it down, could be really, really helpful. I think the other thing that we could add in there is actually you can already, ask people who are on your board, particularly the advocator, to help you build out by approaching people on your behalf, etc. And I know that, I'm sure many of us have had that experience where you've said to somebody who's in your boardroom is really a very strong advocate for you, actually, I'm finding that I'm really struggling with XYZ, do you know anyone? And they automatically go in and open up the door for you, and that makes the ask so much easier. So it might not even be that you have to do the ask, somebody can do it on your behalf. That's the other thing. And I can see Anne's got, so thank you for that, Zoe, that's really super helpful. I can see Anne's got her hand up as well.
It's on Zoe's point, really, that it's why I typed in about sounding board being a very good descriptor. Actually, when I started my freelance business, when I was beyond PR, as it were, I called myself a sounding board, because the person you're asking, I think, will feel less inhibited in the way that Meg describes about time and can they do this, if you ask them to think of a sounding board, because under that heading comes in, you could say, I find you really inspiring, or I'd really appreciate your support with this, and a lot of these other things would come out of the conversation. But if you're asking someone to be a sounding board as opposed to a mentor, or as opposed to an advocate, or something where they're beginning to think, oh, is this an hour a week, or what, have I got time for this? Most people, I think, are actually rather flattered to be asked. And I think you're absolutely right, Rebecca, they will very often come up with somebody else as well they think would be helpful. But if you put it like that in quite an informal way, I think people will be flattered, more likely to say, less likely to worry about the time commitment. And it just sort of, it's a good entry point.
Thanks for that, Anne. Yeah, and so that's also about maybe there are easier places if we think about maybe there are easier places to start with building out your board that will help you build confidence, so that when you get to those stickier, and everyone will have their own stickier part to the boardroom, that that they've got a bit of that, that experience, that confidence they need to then go and make those what they think in their head is probably more difficult asks. Yeah, as well. So Zoe, I can see you've got your hand up as well. Do you want to?
Yeah, I just want to respond to something that Anne had said. I've found when I've made asks in the past that, yeah, people are flattered, but also some of the women that I've asked have said no from their own confidence perspective. And that's some of the scripting that I'm thinking about in terms of like anticipating the reactions and how to deal with them. Is when I've asked a particular woman in the past, she said, oh no, I couldn't possibly because I don't think I'd have anything to add. And I really did, I was totally floored by that. And I don't, in my own head, I was like, oh, this is just her polite way of saying no. And I was sort of stuck in my own story, and then this is the polite decline. But actually, she was genuinely saying she didn't really understand why I was asking her. And it took me saying the role that I would see you playing for me would be X because Y, before she was like, oh, actually, that is something that I could do. But it never occurred to me they were going to say no from a confidence perspective on their own part. Of course, it occurred to me that I didn't have the courage to ask, but not that they would say in response, well, I don't think that I hold those skills. What are you talking about? So it was interesting.
That's really interesting. And I wonder if that might be a generational piece. Really interesting to think about that as well in the context of conversation.
I never would have got that from a man.
Jane. Thank you, Zoe.
Yeah. Actually, perfect timing, because based on the last comment, my first reaction is that we're overthinking this a little bit, in the sense that, generally speaking, women are more social than men. So if you take that part of it, then why do men find it so easy to pick up the phone or shoot off a text or an email saying, hey, would like to bounce something off of you. Do you have 5 minutes? And they would not, I can't speak for them, but I don't think they see that as asking for something as a favor. It's business. Whereas women incorporate as Meg said, get the noise out of your head. And if you have something to ask, just ask it. The worst that's going to happen is they're going to say no. But generally speaking, I think that women are there to be supportive, and do anything they can to help other women, be it in business or otherwise. And I think it doesn't come that second nature to men. Very stereotypical, and I apologize for that, but I'm just wondering if we're overthinking it a little bit.
I think it's a good point that you make, Jane. In my experience, in response to that, is women, and there are generational differences, there are cultural differences, we said, but generally speaking, in stereotypes, women are socialized differently, and we're socialized to believe and to work much more on a reciprocal, collaborative basis, and less on, as Meg was talking about, the transactional. And for the men, this is what I mean about loose ties, the dormant ties, it is much more acceptable for men generally to be much more transactional. Whereas women, if I do something for you, will you expect something in return? Ought I to do something in return? And that's where the noise all starts kicking in. Yeah. Right. So, and maybe generationally that, that might shift a bit, but only if we get enough women in senior leadership roles, if we're talking about the work context here. Yeah, if we don't have enough women in senior, in that mid-career onward space, it's probably unlikely to shift, is my view. That's a very sort of personal view. Yeah. But I do think it's really important to stress that the boardroom should be a mix of women and men. Yeah, I would
Sure.
never,
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
never advocate for anyone having a boardroom that is only one gender or the other, or, you know, there are many genders. So, you know, you know, if we're thinking about it in this context of men and women, I would say that absolutely it should be there should always be great diversity in the boardroom, because that's where the challenge.
The more diverse, the better, obviously, on all levels. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so I'm going to go back to, I'm just doing a time check. I got as far as the ask, point 4. So I think we've done a bit of unpacking your own stories and limiting beliefs about getting in what's in your head. And I like this idea that Zoe came up with to help you unpack a bit of that and develop the ask. And then I think the biggest challenge I see in all of this, and Laura and Jane, I think this comes to your point, is, are we overthinking it? If it's not intentional, I think it doesn't happen. Yeah. And so particularly in a work, in a business context, in a career context, then it always goes to the bottom of the pile with women. And whereas I've observed with men, it never goes to the bottom of the pile. The number of events and networking things I've organized, and I've had female colleagues, clients cancel, and I know that the men are equally busy, but they never cancel. They show up. You know, and I think this is the thing here that we're saying, is it's going to take time. So how do we, maybe the analogy of brushing teeth or whatever it is a little teeny weeny bit is better than nothing at all. Yeah. And then this idea of this lifetime, for a lifetime, for a season, for a reason, rotating people in and out is point 7, and then point 8 is really about seek and act on feedback. And I love that. Who was it who said the butt kicking? I think it might have been Zoe. The butt kicking, the tough messages, as well as the encouragement, and the opportunity really to learn from wisdom. And finally, and I know this is close to all of the Quorum members' hearts, is this reciprocation of paying it forward. Yeah. So you know, whose personal board are you currently sitting on? How many individuals are you helping? And I've rattled through those last few points. I'd love some comments and some, if we've got you know, some input on those before we kind of wrap up, because I know you also like to finish very punctually. So and I know we've got a couple of next steps we want to share as well, but if there any input on any of those, do feel free, either put it in the chat or just raise a hand quickly. I can see that we've got a comment here about Megan. Rebecca, I'd love your thoughts, reflections on thinking about the personal board of directors in the context of saying that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So being surrounded by innovative, entrepreneurial, who are ambitious and hardworking is likely to have a positive effect. I love that, actually. Yeah, I'm going to completely steal that. That is the aspirational piece.
It is.
Yeah.
It is for sure. It is for sure. I'm such a big believer the more you stretch, the more you can stretch yourself in every aspect of who you invite in to your board at any stage. The more dynamic that exchange is going to be. There's no question in my mind about that. And that's at least been my experience as well, you know, so.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, and there's another comment in here from Somi. Often I find I'm getting as much from mentees. Yeah. As I hope. Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Zoe says, can you share a recommendation on how you actually use and convene your board? Yeah, that's a really, and maybe that I think that's another thing, is like use, convene, example. From my perspective, just to answer Zoe's question very quickly, it tends to be very informal with me, in the sense that I don't convene, I don't bring them all together. I tend to reach out to them we have regular contact. Others, it tends to be much more ad hoc. But I do make sure that if anyone hasn't been in touch, you know, we haven't had a chance to be in touch for a while, that I do proactively reach out. And to be honest, people drop off as well. You know, people move out of the sphere. Some people transition out of whatever they're doing, retire, whatever, you know. And so, you know, so people do rotate out as well. I've never actually had a formal conversation about rotating somebody off my personal board. It tends
It
to be
just
something.
happens.
It
just tends to
gradual.
happen.
Yeah. I sort of have images of, you know, you're fired. But
oh, please don't have that image. Yeah, I've never convened a full board, not my personal board. I've never fully convened them either, for if that's helpful as well. It's much more of schedule that seems right for the relationship that you have, you know, with that individual, and what you need in the moment, or, you know, or I think that matters a lot in terms of the pace of interaction.
And Meg, I wonder if we can almost write in, and this is a lovely segue to our ask, is actually a couple of case studies around how people have put together a board, now that you know what we're formally calling it, you know, and how you've approached that. If anyone would like to volunteer to be a case study, Meg and I would love to have. We ideally want our case studies from, you know, a number of different regions, so that we can also bring out a little bit of that cultural, generational, all of that sort of side of that, give it that richness, if you like. So if any of you would like to be a case study, we would be delighted.
Sure.
And it's not an onerous ask. We can do it fairly quickly. Oh, Kelly's raised a hand.
Oh, I volunteer to be a case study.
Oh, yay!
all the help I can get formalizing my board.
Fantastic. And so thank you very much. And Meg, I'm just conscious we're 2 minutes before time.
Yeah.
Oh, and Julie's also volunteered. That's fabulous. Thank you, Julie.
What we'll do is just actually set up some time and interview any of you who are interested. By the way, you don't have to decide now. You're welcome to reconnect with us at another point and let us know. Let Diane know, you know, that you're interested, and she'll make sure one of us follows up with you, just so that we can build this out, make it rich, and make it available to others. Because the one thing that Rebecca and I are so sure about is the more women really think about this and act on it intentionally, the greater their ability to kind of move through their career will be on so many levels, in terms of how they think about it, what they do, the support that they get to do it, you know, et cetera. So we think this is really critical. And the more that we can get women to intentionally think about this and incorporate that in everything that they do, we think this will just unleash the amazing talent and power that all of us have, you know, that deserves to find the light, you know. So I would just put that out there as kind of overall. Just quickly to wrap up today, because I'm appreciative of everybody's time, and thank you all again for making the time to listen to Rebecca and I. If you have feedback you didn't get a chance to share or comes up over time for you, please reach out. Our action steps, because we never leave a quorum meeting without some action. So we have a couple action steps. One is we're going to be sending a template around that Rebecca talked about for you to use for yourself as a little worksheet. So please take a look at it and take some action around it. Start thinking about where you stand and what's going on for you, and what your broader support system looks like. We think it's really important. So start thinking about it and start mapping, and then consider how you might take some action to get going on building that board. We're going to continue to do the work that we're doing, and I'm going to talk on your behalf, Rebecca. We are available to be helpful in any way as you're thinking about this, because the exchange is really important for us as we try to think about how we share this in a more broader context for women. So Rebecca mentioned the case studies. Once again, that's an ask if you or an action if you're interested in being part of the case study effort, please don't hesitate. And then I think Diane, do we have any like end of the year announcements that I'm forgetting to make that we should be making on behalf of Quorum?
Yeah, well, a couple of quick things. Besides thanking both of you, this has been fabulous. We have an information session coming up on Thursday, just for those of you who are not members of Quorum or a newer Quorum, that to give you information about what all we're doing and the benefits of becoming a member. We have a fabulous session coming up on January 18th. Andrina Boto and Gitanjali Sakuja about the uniqueness advancing DEI in the global workplace. It's going to be fabulous. So thank you both very much.
So mark your calendars for that. Yeah.
Oh, I have one more thing. Can I just jump in?
Sure.
Yes.
I'm going to self-promote Quorum Live. We have a great Quorum Live next week that I'll be hosting with our special guest, Mary Messner from the Women President.
Madam President.
Madam President's
Madam
Camp.
President.
Always screw that up. It's on December 19th at 12:30 p.m. ET.
Great. Thank you, Julie. All right, everybody. So that's kind of, thank you.